Hello everybody, I'm Catriona Morten, I'm a sensory motor psychotherapist, and today I'd like to talk to you about OCD, Obsessional Compulsive Disorder. And I'm joined today by my lovely little furry assistant, Lily. So OCD is something I hear people talk about a lot. I'm a wee bit OCD. And when people with genuine full-blown OCD hear people talk about themselves as a little bit OCD, it can be very dismissing for them and very invalidating of what can be a really, really debilitating condition. It's something that develops over time, and it's a way of having maximum control over our external world, usually because the internal world is very dysregulated and feels very out of control. And when that can't be managed and it feels like our whole system can take us down at any time, because we humans love control, we need control over things. We like to know what's happening, we hate unexpected events, some of us deal really badly with change. We need routine, we need consistency from a really young age. And when we haven't got that, then we have to have that externally. And so it's very common to want things to be a certain way. And there's all sorts of different aspects to OCD. For some people, it's about cleanliness, having everything clean, their hands, if their hands come into contact with anything on the outside, even if it's been washed 100 times, it feels like it's contamination. And that contamination can feel dangerous to someone who's got a very, very fragile or very dysregulated nervous system. It sets the brain putting together a narrative that goes along with this, that drives it. And the narrative for someone with OCD can sound like a really nagging voice, or a voice that's full of warning and doom and gloom and stark warnings of what will happen if you don't wash your hands, if you don't do certain rituals. Full-blown OCD is very ritualistic. The rituals in themselves have that consistency. They have elements of them that have to be in place. Every piece of that ritual has to be complete before the person with OCD feels like they can move on to the next thing. And if that's a security thing, if we don't feel safe and to a huge degree, then we have to make our world safe and secure. So we'll check windows, we'll check locks, check all our security system over and over again in this ritual. And the problem with OCD is because we're trying to manage the external world, because we're not aware that it's the internal world that is really kind of screaming at us, then those rituals grow. They never quite feel enough. The problem with a solution that has a kind of ritualistic element to it is that initially it can feel like a solution to a problem. Yes, I've made sure I've checked all the locks and fastened all the windows down and I can feel safe and leave. The problem with that is it gains in momentum, and the fear of getting something wrong then overrides the feeling of ease and safety and settling that it gives. So we have to check 14, 15 times just to make sure when we can leave the house. And then quite often the head will go, are you sure you didn't? Are you sure you checked that one? Are you sure you checked that one? And it can become very difficult, which is why it's called obsessive. And it really takes over. Someone who has full-blown OCD often will have a narrative in their head that will say, if you don't do this, then something awful is going to happen. For some of the rituals, it can be, especially some of the counting rituals, people have to count light switches on and off a certain amount of times. For some people it's an odd number, for some people it's an even number. Touching a door handle so many times. Even although a rational head can go, I really don't need to do that, it's really not necessary. The fear of if you don't do that, then something awful will happen. Maybe not even to you, but maybe to members of the family. It feels like it's too big a risk to take. But what if? What if I don't do it and then something happens? It's then because I didn't do this thing. And so it becomes absolutely enmeshed into every aspect of that person's safety and the safety of others around them. And that massive sense of responsibility, even although there's a part of the brain that goes, maybe that's not actually the case. And it doesn't matter if, you can point out to somebody, you're not Harry Potter. You don't have magic to be able to do these things. The feeling of unease and panic that comes at the thought of not doing those things or trying to reduce them is so overwhelming that it feels a very, very real risk. That is different to someone who just has to have all the tins in their shelves facing the right way, or has to have the things in the wardrobe in a particular order. Because the difference between that just making us feel better, these are things that we're very particular about, and they can make us feel a bit irritated or a bit slightly uncomfortable if those things aren't in place. That's really different to the catastrophic feeling that someone with OCD has. And the problem with it is it grows, because it never feels like enough, because it isn't enough, because actually it's the internal world that is the problem. It's the lack of regulation inside, the lack of feeling of control inside, internally in our nervous system, in our body, that is driving this. And so the anxiety of it not being enough, what if it doesn't work, maybe I need to do it again, it increases the internal anxiety. So this thing that maybe for the first couple of times that we used it, it's like, oh, that's good, I actually feel better now. It just takes on a life form of its own. And people with full-blown OCD find that it overtakes their life. It makes it almost impossible for them to live a normal life, because there's so many rituals to do, and there's so many, hundreds and hundreds of times that their hands have to be washed, hundreds of things that need to be checked, that their actual functional life, the capacity for that becomes smaller and smaller and smaller. So the OCD is the big thing, and once it really gets a grip on people, it's very, very hard to step outside of it and to uncouple ourselves from it. The people that like things in order, they will often say that when they're feeling a bit more stressed or anxious or unwell, then they do these things a bit more. But it's not technically full-blown OCD. It's just a way of managing our external world. And I always ask people, if they come to me with OCD, is it really getting in the way of them being able to live their life? If OCD is becoming a real problem, then it will be affecting people's lives in a way of making it impossible to get out to work, to be able to stay at work. How much sleep are they getting? Are the rituals getting so bad that actually the amount of time that they have in bed is less and less and less? When they're in bed, is the worry about have they done enough of the rituals, the catastrophizing thinking, is that interrupting the sleep pattern? Is your sleep very, very broken or fretful, waking up feeling more tired than when you went to sleep? Does it make it impossible to go out and do things? Does it make it really difficult to be with friends? If we're going out somewhere, if we have an obsession with having to wash our hands, or what if there isn't a toilet? then it means that we'll say no to invitations and just find lots of excuses for staying at home. And so it's a very, very lonely, isolating condition where the only thing that sometimes people have left are the rituals. So there's no richness of life, whether it's social, work, sleep, eating can really affect the way that people can eat and the things that they can allow themselves to eat because of a whole load of different rules. So when people feel their life starting to shrink and these things that they used to be able to do are miles away, it's like I haven't been able to do that for ages. The thought of, what it would take for me to be able to do those things is just so massive. So those things move further away and our OCD jams us in this kind of prison of worry, fear, rituals. There's no quality of life with that. It's really debilitating, it's really limiting, and it can feel suffocating. And the problem is when it's got to that stage, if we say, well, okay then, what we have to do is reduce the amount of times that we do these things. How can we reduce this? A little bit like treating addiction. If all we do is take away the resource, no matter how unhealthy, then we're bereft. It's like, well, what do we do now? And if we just take away, then these obsessions, these addictions, they just get passed from one thing to another. So we feel like we're playing whack-a-mole. That one's down, that one's up, that one's down, that one's up. We can't organise the whole world, order the whole world in a way that's going to make us feel better. We have to be able to deal with the problem at the root core. And so that means the number one thing is, first of all, recognising what's starting to happen in the body and sending the brain offline, and finding ways of regulating and reducing once we can feel what it is. Constriction in our breath, pins and needles all over our arms, going numb, whatever it is, finding the resources that allow our system to regulate so our anxiety about these things is reduced. Having some resources that actually add in. So if we're looking for safety, stability, consistency, how can we get that from within here first? Because if we can really work on the things in here, the need for them to be in place out there isn't as great. It's not as absolute life-threatening. The other thing that really needs tackling are the very obsessive and persistent thoughts. People with really severe OCD feel like they're ruled by these voices in the head that say, you must do this, you have to do this. It's catastrophic if it doesn't happen. And it's like that's how the brain joins in with all of these things and the mind. And so we have to find a way of not believing in those things, believing in the internal world. It's like, no, I can reduce my anxiety. I can have control over things, and finding ways of getting that sense of control within our body, whether it's things that we do with our muscles, whether it's things that we do mirroring with our fingers, whether or not we can count and tap a little rhythm out with our feet. So we've got control over things in here. Those voices, they'll come up, expect them to come up. They're gonna come up immediately, but could there be something else that comes after that? It's like, yeah, that one always comes up and it always tells me to do that. Could I soften it? Could I have another one that comes after it to say, no, I don't have to do that right now, or it's gonna be okay. I'm going to make sure that I keep myself safe. And so we end up with more of the responsibility and the control for ourselves rather than it relying on this quite fragile and very anxiety-inducing set of rituals that we've got in place. Because the world outside of us is quite unpredictable. Things can interrupt it. And so that's a very fragile existence to have, apart from the fact that it overtakes your life and there isn't any room for anything else. But in here, we've always got our nervous system, we've always got our arms and our legs, we've always got our breath and our energy. And when we can manage that and feel like we've got some control over it and some impact on it, it's like taking the focus in here and away from out here. And until we can do that, all we're going to do is create massive anxiety and trying to reduce these things. So the key is adding into our system, to our body, our nervous system, our digestive system, our temperature regulation system. They'll all let us know when we're on the right track, because we can feel it, we can track it, and we can trust in it. And our body is consistent. If we have a reaction to something, it will be the same reaction every time. The same things will happen in the body every time. And that can be really, really reassuring. So instead of it being a source of anxiety, my breath's going tight, it's like, oh yeah, my breath always goes tight, it always does that. But when I do this, you know, if it's pressing on my chest or finding a way of taking a deeper breath into there, and that always settles it. Well, you've got your control. You've got your way of managing this. And that's a much safer, consistent way of doing things than relying on things out there. So I really hope that makes sense. And I really hope it helps give some understanding for people who suffer this debilitating condition. It's not a choice, it's a compulsion. And they really find it very, very difficult, and they hide it because there's a lot of shame with it. So let's have a bit of understanding and compassion for people who have this debilitating condition. If you like this video, give us a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel below, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Bye.